welcome back to So What, our conversational sewing show. Try saying that quickly. Our conversational sewing show, where we talk about all things sewing with me, Stuart from the Wool Patch, a beginner sewer, and of course, Carol Elaine, our master tailor couturier. Hey, Carol.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Stuart. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, and to you too. And it's lovely.
Did we say that already? Did we already say Happy
We
New
did,
Year?
yes. But and how wonderful to be talking to you when it's light outside. It's that feeling we get at 4:30, 4:45, where the day just ekes out a little bit every day, doesn't it?
And every day gets a little bit more hopeful, and the pressure's on to do a little bit more, because when it's dark, we kind of think, oh, well, that's the end of that then, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Scissors down, but no.
No, and I know your scissors are going crazy because you've got deadlines looming. So we'll go quickly on because you're working hard. Now, we're talking about Jersey, and look what I see there. Fabulous.
Well, in prep, yes, I knew we were going to talk about Jersey. So I've got this length of Jersey Lurex. So it's got a metallic-y, silvery thread running through it. This is the top side, of course. The underside is a bit deeper red.
Yeah.
You can actually, you can have some fun with this if you wanted. But I wanted to talk about Jersey and just the wonderful way that it clings in all the right places.
Yes.
And you can stretch it and you can make things happen, and it drapes beautifully, and you just get loads of personality.
Yeah.
So,
but the only thing with that, yes, that positive of having loads of personality and the lovely drapes and the ripples, it can also be, therefore, a very scary thing to deal with.
It's tricky. It's tricky because it stretches.
Right.
And oftentimes, I don't know if the listeners have experienced this or not, but sometimes you'll get a length of jersey, they'll cut it, and then it just curls up on the cross.
We'll hold you to that, because Áine, that was one of our questions from Instagram. She said, is there a way to stop those edges curling? Is it?
You have to prepare the fabric because that's in its nature. That's what it does. It's the weave, right? I don't know if you have this in knitting. Does this happen when you knit? We
do, and look at me. Look, I've got a sample for you. Look, this is my finished object. Look,
it's beautiful. And
I knitted it and I put a zip in.
That's beautiful, Stuart.
No.
And look how the matching of the pattern, superb. Oh,
so a bit of the mechanics out there for people who aren't too sure what jersey is. Jersey is often called, I think in America, knit fabric. Same words, interchangeable for the same fabric. And it is basically, think of your knitting, and you have, knitting is made up of the knit stitch on the front, which is those classic V's, and then the purl, which is the back side of the knit, these bumps on the back. Now, it's lovely, that stitch, but if you were breaking it down technique-wise, it then means there is more fabric on the back than there is the front. And what happens is this.
There you are. There you are. Yes.
And it's purely down to the amount of fabric. So it naturally curls over because of the distribution of fabric weight. There's more on one side than the other. And in the knitting world, the only way we stop that from curling is by not putting the V's on the front. We'll have some purls on the front, so it weighs out and distributes that balance more. However, if you were doing a neck, some people like that. If you were doing a roll neck, some people like that effect where it rolls down like that. It's quite a nice little effect. But when you're cutting jersey fabric, jersey or knit is exactly the same, but minuscule, isn't it? Absolutely minuscule compared You can't see the V's on most jersey knit fabric, can you? But it's the same principle.
That's
and that's
right.
why it rolls, isn't it?
Yeah. Thanks for that. That's a really good explanation. So that is why it gets that character about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're sewing jersey, it's about preparation and it's about controlling the fabric. So I've got some samples. There's some questions, I think.
There are indeed.
We can talk about those, and then we'll have a look at some tutorials.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll learn how to control the fabric. But really, it is about preparation. So you cut your pieces out. You have raw edges. You know, you can put a machine top stitch, 1/4 of an inch from the edge, inside your seam allowance. It just sets to control it a little bit.
Right.
If you use a slightly longer stitch, then you can even gather it up, you know, so, and take that back to your pattern, compare it. If something has stretched just by cutting it or just by pressing it, you want to get it back into shape, don't you? So there's lots of things you can do. You can buy a fusible tape. It's about 1 centimeter wide. And in the middle of this tape, there's kind of a chain stitch, which keeps it from stretching. So you press that on, number one, it'll stop it from curling. And then number two, it will just control the shape of it. So there are things out there, there are tricks, but with jersey, it's practice. And each jersey has a different weight. It has a different distribution of the backing and the size of the stitches and all that. So it's just about practice. So we're going to say this again and again, aren't we? Make some samples.
Yeah.
Try it out. See what works.
It's true. And I found with the few jersey fabrics I've sold here in this shop, there are different qualities as well, according to how much money you spend. I have found that the more expensive jersey fabrics do somehow seem to roll less. I don't know whether it's because of the makeup, how it's made. And then if you buy a really, really cheap jersey, sometimes they seem to roll really lots. I don't know why.
I found that as well. And you can get some really fine, expensive silk jerseys, and they just obey. You know, you snap your fingers and they just fall into place. But it's because, you know, the top quality and just the beautiful manufacture of these cloths.
How have you found, because also with jersey, you get jersey mixes, don't you? You get straight knit jersey fabric, or that one there. Did you say that had something else with it? Did you say it had lurex?
Yes, so that has a metallic thread going through, which is, it feels brittle on the outside. It feels a little bit scratchy, and that's where it bubbles on that side. On the inside, you don't, because of the back, because of your different stitch on the back. You don't feel that as much.
So did that roll much when you cut? Did it, or did that behave not differently or less?
This behaves quite well. There's the cross grain.
Look at that.
That's quite obedient. Now it could be, it's just very fine. Just the threads are very fine, and it could have, because the lurex on the top is heavier than the bottom. Maybe that's just kind of evens it out. I don't know, but the danger of this one is it tends to, if you pull one of those lurex threads, it will create a run. So it's picky. It's picky. It's fragile and delicate in that way. But anyway, that's just one of the downsides. It's a really lovely, luxurious evening cloth, but it has that other side. Right.
I'm looking at it from here now. You could just see the wonderful figure hugging, and look at those drapes that you've got there, and those sort of little ripples.
And then just the way it moves. So it has a very fluid property about it, doesn't it? So.
A lot of my, I'm in a gym top at the moment because that's where I'll go after this. A lot of my gym jersey has some sort of spandex or lurex or lycra in it, and I like it because it moves with you, doesn't it, as well, but also breathable. Yes,
and since they started to add that in, it's just revolutionized things, haven't they? Because we have a stretched Duchess satin. which is the most beautiful cloth. It just pours, you know, and it's pearlescent, and
Yeah.
it just so glamorous. But it was quite rigid. So just to have that 3% in the Duchess satin or anything now, anything at all has that. You know, you think of the jeans. Remember how jeans used to buy them and I don't know, get wet, wear them in the shower, you know, and then come out and have them form fit, you know, over time. But now it's stressed, it's washed, it's got the combination of
I think mine. I've now bought my Levi's, classic Levi's. I think 97% cotton, and then that 3% elastine. Just
beautiful.
Makes
so
a big
comfortable,
difference.
huh?
Yeah. So before we go to the questions, which are with our tutorials that we've got, can we talk about the showing? I haven't got my teeth in today, have I? Sewing machine needles for jersey, because I do know a little now, as I've sort of taught myself. There, you do use a different needle, don't you, for jersey?
You use a ballpoint needle.
Okay.
Which then just it sort of bounces off. It doesn't pierce the, you know, the warp and weft. It just kind of It spreads the fibers away from each other, and then you don't get a stitch, and you don't pierce the threads because it's, you know, it's spongy, it's moving. So you use that. You can get away with a very fine needle. I found that works. You know, the old 70 will work. And in fact, I did some of the samples with a ballpoint and some with the 70, and I would say either or would work. But to be safe, you know, if you're trying this for the first time, just get the right tools for the job.
And for people at home, it will often, I've got the make class A. It will say ballpoint, or it'll be coloured. That's an 80, but they do come in the 70, which is what you were saying. But that's a 70 ballpoint. You were using a 70 normal, normal.
But I also used a 70 ballpoint as well. So I used two sizes. Yes, that one, I used that one, and just a straight.
So that's good. And your thread was normal polyester thread or cotton thread? Nothing special?
Normal mercerized cotton is what I use. You want something strong, so you want either a poly thread or a poly covering on it, because you need it to stretch. The fabric's going to stretch. It's going to give, so you need that. You can use a very fine zigzag stitch if you're using a domestic machine. If you don't have an overlocker and you want the fabric to be able to give, you can use a very narrow zigzag stitch.
Oh, brilliant.
Because there's more texture in the jersey cloth. So when you press it flat, when you press the seams open, you're going to get a nice flat finish because there's more texture. It's more built up. So
look at that, brilliant. Let's go to our first question, Carol, from Susan. She says, what's the best hem treatment if one doesn't have access to a cover stitch machine?
Okay, so if we're talking about jersey and you don't have, do we mean an overlocker?
Oh yes, sorry, yes.
Okay. All right. You know, I very rarely use an overlocker. I use a couture finish if I can, anytime that I can. But I like the cover stitch to neaten seams up, you know, before I finish them off, so that they, you know, it's a part of the long-term life of the garment. What I would recommend is there's three. The first one is going to be the double turned hem, which is quite neat. Okay, and you simply turn your fabric up and then up again. So over a quarter and over a quarter again. Then I'm going to show you a few examples of how you can incorporate this bias binding, which is very stretchy. You know, it's cut on the bias, so it gives a lot of stretch. And then a way that you can sew this hem with a top stitch. And then it's kind of fun because you can use a different color on the inside. You know, that gives the garment some personality. Or you can make your own bias on the fold, and then you can hem that by hand. And that gives you a nice crisp finish. So
This is what you say, that nice couture finish.
a
Yeah.
nice couture finish, right? And there's no raw edges anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, you can't see any of the seam finishes. It's all enclosed. So take a look at these options, and if you don't like the look of these and you want to see something else, we can talk about some more. So have a look. The first one is going to be a machine top stitched hem. So I've started by sewing a guide stitch at about 1/4 inch on the right side of the fabric. Then I've pressed the fabric over just past the top stitching. And now I'm going to do a double turn. So this is our first turn, and I'm going to do a double turn, and then we're just going to top stitch it. Okay, so I'll turn the fabric around like this. I'll just do a small section. So there's our first turn. Here's our second turn. Now you can do this by eye, or you can do this by pressing it over your second turn and pressing it down flat, but you should be able to feel where to turn it. If you've gone too far, you can feel the ridge underneath. If you don't go far enough, then it will double up on itself and it'll start to curl. So make sure you have a ballpoint needle in, and I would choose a wider stitch than your normal sewing, and use your presser foot and just sew at the same point. Okay, so just pick a point on your presser foot and maintain that spacing. You want to stitch as close to the fold as possible. And there you are. There's your machine hem. Okay, see, no skip stitches because we've used a ballpoint needle. And we've used a larger stitch, and there's still some stretch in it. So that's one method. That's your machine stitch. And now we're going to look at a bias faced hem. So we start with the length of this bias tape, which you can buy in your trimming merchant. Normally, you can buy it flat like this, 2 edges pressed in, or sometimes it comes where it's folded over. And the idea there is to sandwich just a raw edge in and top stitch it closed. So you just get a nice finish on there. But we're going to use this trim to make a bias faced hem. So the first thing I've done is I've pressed opened one of these folds. Okay, and then I've laid the trim right sides together on top of the piece of jersey, and I've sewn right in the fold. So this is about a little less than 1/4 inch. Sewed that down, and now this is attached, and I'm going to now put in a row of understitch, which is just stitching as close as you can to the join, but understitching, as you know, it presses this seam all to one side. You anchor it down with this row of understitching, and then when you turn it up, you get a nice clean finish. So there, our understitching is done, and now we're going to take this and we're going to fold it to the inside of our hem. Now you can give this a nice press, get everything nice and flat, but I'll just finish it off to show you the idea here. We're going to then, again, stitch close to the fold of this bias hem facing, and that's going to finish off the hem. So it's kind of like the double turn in that it's done by machine and you can see it from the outside, but this gives you just a little bit more body on the bottom hem, a bit better weight. So there's that. So it's a nice clean finish, and it's got a better depth to it, so it's going to hang nicer. And once that's pressed, it's going to give you a really nice finish. You can do it in a contrast, which might be a bit fun for the garment, or you can just finish it off with a tone-on-tone bias. So machine double turn and our bias faced. Then I'm going to show you a third one, and this is using a piece of bias fabric, and we're just simply going to fold it in half and press it. Now this is about 7/8 of an inch deep. You can make it deeper, you can make it narrower. But this hem isn't going to show on the other side. So I'm going to set my raw edges together at about 1/4 inch, or the edge of the presser foot. I'm just going to sew at 1/4 inch.
Make sure all your raw edges are even. Now this one you can understitch again. And then this one we're going to put a hand finish on. Now you might remember your hemming stitch. You might have a favorite one, or you can do this to show, but this is going to be an invisible hem. Okay? Now all you do here is you just turn this back just a little bit, and then you hem it as normal. So I'll just get a needle and show you. So you would just take a tiny bit from your main garment fabric, just a tiny bit, and then move over and take a bigger stitch of your binding. And that's just your regular felled hem stitch. And when that's pressed, your hem is going to look just like that. So there's nothing to show on the outside. So this is 3 different ways of finishing off your jersey fabric, either with a machine top stitch, narrow hem, or a slightly more reinforced, deeper hem, or using again the bias fabric, an invisible hem.
So our next question, what is the best way to put in a stretch neckline so it sits flat? And I feel for you there. I know how hard that is. This is my this is what we did during the sewing bee last year. Can you remember?
I remember that. Yes, I remember that. Yes, indeed. There it is.
My first attempt at a raglan, and that was really enjoyable because there was less pressure with a raglan. But you can see I had just got my overlocker.
Okay.
Now I should have used navy rather than white, but
that's all right. No problem.
The neck does sit flat, but that's because it was my second attempt at the neck. So I feel for that question, I feel for many out there who probably all suffer. There is an art to putting the neck in, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing is of course, it's the proportion of neckline, the rib neckline, that proportion to the size of your neckline.
Yeah.
Now, everyone talks about different factors. Some people say the ribbing should be 2/3 of the neck. Well, that's quite a tight rib. I use about 0.85. So you take you measure out your neckline.
Yeah.
Multiply that finished raw edge. That's less your seams. Multiply that measurement by 0.85. Okay, so you're getting rid of about 15%.
Okay.
Then you cut your rib to that size. And then the other thing you can do is you can mark the neckline into, say, quarters.
That's the way I did this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quarters or eighths, as many as you need.
Yeah.
Do you remember what your ratio was, Stuart?
No, because I was following a pattern, and the pattern just told me to cut. And I think that if you are following a pattern, most patterns should just tell you how much of a strip to cut.
That's it. Yeah.
Really.
Okay.
So I just followed their pattern, but it's that tricky bit when you're sewing it down, because you do have to tug slightly, and I think I must have got that wrong and not tugged enough, or I tugged too much. Yeah,
and the trickiest thing is that you're dealing with 3 edges that want to curl.
Yes.
Because your ribbing is cut on the cross grain.
Yeah.
And you fold it in half. You have 2 edges which are curly.
Yeah.
And then part of your neckline, because part of your neckline is going to be on the straight, and then it's going to curve around, and it's going to be on the cross grain. That's going to want to curl. And then it's going to curve again, and it's going to be back on the straight, depending on how low the oval is on your neckline. Or if it's a crew neckline, it's going to be mostly on the cross grain. So you've got 3 unruly raw edges of fabric. And when you tug one over the other, you've got to control those 2 curly edges and kind of just bounce it down onto the third curly edge, and then let it take it back in. Secure it with pins, but it's all about that, just learning the tension and the tolerances of how to control these fabrics. So I did a short sample of this one. And what I did is I then top stitched just below the rib. So the neckline is in white.
Yeah.
The main garment is in navy. Yeah. I've sewed these 3 unruly curly edges. You see that curling, right, like crazy. Yeah. But in order to keep them flat, you might press them all down.
Ah, yes.
All down toward the garment. Now, I think yours go up.
Yeah.
And then to secure them, to keep it flat, you can top stitch it on the top. Now, before you top stitch it, you might want to take this over to the overlocker and overlock all these together.
Oh, I think that's what I've done. Look, there.
That's what you've done, yeah. Now, did you sew the rib on and then overlock it, or did you use 4 spools?
I did that.
A 4 spool. Yeah, okay, so you got the seam and the finish in one.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so there's more than 10 ways to do this, but this is what I'd like to show you now. I'd like to show you each step of the way here, okay? How to work out the proportion, how to mark, and how to control. So take a look at this.
I've got a front neck edge here. I've marked off the shoulder seam allowance, and I've cut a piece of ribbing. Now, how did I arrive at the size? I use a ratio of about 0.85. Sometimes between 0.75 and 0.9, it just depends. But a good average is 0.85. Now, what does that mean? You measure your neck edge, and I'll just do that in centimeters. Take off the seam allowance, and what you can do, I've marked a halfway point here. So you just walk the tape along the raw edge. And the halfway point here it's about 21, just shy of 21. So let's say the neckline is 42. Multiply that by 0.8 and you get 37, I believe. 37 point something centimeters. So that's what I've cut, 37.7 centimeters. I've decided I'd like my neck ribbing to be about 3/4 of an inch. So I've cut this at 2 inches, which gives me 1.5 inches for the double on the fold ribbing, which will be what shows, and then I have another 1/2 inch, 1/4 and 1/4 again for the seam. And I've marked this in quarters. I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a little chalk mark there. I've done the same to the piece of ribbing, minus the seam allowance. I've marked it in quarters, and I put little notches in. And then all that's left to do is to fold this in half and to sew it along. So I'll just do this part way. So raw edges even, all 3 edges line up. Now normally you'd have a shoulder seam sewn, right? So you know I'm doing this without a shoulder seam. And then I'm simply going to stretch. I'll start by securing a few stitches, right? There we go. And then you're going to stretch this so that this mark, where I have these notches, make sure they're even. I'm going to line it up with this mark. Put a pin in there to secure it. Pin across your work like this. And then you get an idea of just how that has to fit in. See there? You can just stretch that in until everything lines up. There we are. Move it along if it needs it. And then just sew this in at 1/4 inch. Now I'm just going to do this 1/4 of the way along, just so that the video isn't too long. Stop there. And we'll take the work out. And then, see, you can see how nicely that's going to turn around. Now, you can overlock this. You can hand overcast it. and then you're just going to press that so all these seams go on the inside. You could top stitch this down if you wanted. It may not need it, but that's my approach. I use a scale of 0.85 of ribbing to the full length of your neck, and then just line up all the raw edges. And then when you're done, overlock it, press it all flat. If it needs a top stitch, you can go ahead and do that either by hand or by putting it back in the machine and then just giving it a top stitch. And for this, you might want to use a slightly longer stitch. So there you go. And then everything will be nice and flat.
Wonderful set of tutorials there. That makes it so clear. But with doing the neck, it is just a case of almost getting some jersey that you don't mind actually just playing with. Like you said right at the beginning, samples, practice, and just practice doing the neck on a bit of fabric, holding that and stretching it, pulling it, stretching it, isn't it?
That's right. Good sound effect. Do it absolutely, and try different curves.
Yeah.
You know, try something on a straight line first, and then try just a gentle sloping curve, and then try something. Maybe just try binding a circle.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And if you can learn to control something really complicated like that, then the rest is going to be really easy. You know.
And then you'll feel less nervous when you come to doing it with your real jersey for your real garment.
That's it. I think sewing, I'm sure knitting has parallels. It's just getting it in the hands. Yeah. It's learning about tension and tolerance, and it's about control. And the better you get at your preparation and your making of your samples, you know, you don't want to wreck something that you've invested in, you know, so just use anything. Try this with just a woven fabric. You don't even have to try this on jersey. You can use a woven fabric and just cut a bias section. Try, you know, binding a piece of woven fabric with a bias section of that fabric. You know, try lots of things, because chances are you're going to run into that technique somewhere down the line. It's gonna happen.
And if you like a certain fabric, I do think people start using that fabric more. Like, I really like jersey just because I like that sort of gym sort of gear look. So actually I would like to sew more jersey tops, and then you develop those skills and you get better and better at it. And I think people are like that, rather than going, I'm going to make a shirt now, I'm going to make a whatever now. That I think people, you start liking for a fabric, don't you?
That's right. And I think jersey is comfortable, you know, and we've been in lockdown. We've been kind of sitting around, a lot of us, not you, you're in the gym every 5 minutes, but a lot of us, you know, we've taken a less active, you know, lifestyle. And for that reason, you know, jersey can be tailored, and, you know, you don't have to wear these crisp fabrics that are, you know, on you and clinging, and jersey is a lovely, comforting, cozy fabric, which does take shape beautifully. So you can get the same lovely proportioned look, but it just gives you that bit of comfort, you know.
Right, let's go to another question then. From Annie, she says, are we meant to use twin needles when we sew a hem on jersey fabric?
Well, you can, you know, if you have your Coverstitch machine, you can. And that's where some of that sportswear looks really nice, doesn't it? Where you have that parallel row of stitching, perfectly parallel. But you don't have to, as we've seen. You know, there's a choice of hem finishes, lots of them, and jersey can be controlled in the same way that a woven fabric can be controlled. So you do have that option. I think the Coverstitch is certainly a very efficient way of finishing off jersey, and it does look quite nice to have that twin needle finish.
And I suppose we think we should use a twin needle because it's all manufactured from the factories. It comes out and we see it at the bottom or on the cuff, the two needles, and it's all round. Yeah, and it looks great. But as you rightly say, you don't have to at all.
not necessary at all. And you can try. I mean, again, that's where the samples come in. You might find that the twin needle finish looks the best, right? I've got something else to show you, because
Ooh,
at the end of the day, you know, sometimes less is more, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So
yeah, go on.
I've got this fabric, which
Yeah.
is jersey. It's a printed jersey. It's really delicate. You can practically see through it.
Oh, I can, like, yeah, I can see your tape measure and yeah, and you.
It's so fine.
What's the
Now,
grip on that? Is it floppy?
it's really floppy.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's very stretchy. Okay. Now, this is hemmed. This is a hem. This is what we're looking at. Now, you can't see anything, right?
No.
The reason is because when I hem this, now here's my hem. You see it? I simply just cut the raw edge and turned it under and did a felling stitch.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you can see that,
Yeah.
right? I used a very loose stitch,
Yeah.
so it gives.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bounce in the hem stitch. You know, the felling stitch, you take a little bit of the garment fabric and a little bit more of the hem,
Yeah.
tiny bit of the garment. But because anything I would have done to this would have overwhelmed the construction process, and you would have seen it. If I would have overlocked that hem, you would have seen it through.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really careful. You know, the finer the fabric you're dealing with, you want to use a construction technique that is less
Yeah.
than the overall weight and opacity of the cloth. So so you don't overwhelm it. And then just another little trick is, and this is just a sample, but when I attach two pieces together, I didn't want them to stretch. So I sewed in this piece of lining fabric, which is on the straight. You see, it's never going to stretch.
Oh, brilliant.
That's the strongest part of the cloth. So this is simply a selvage edge of a piece of lining. I've sewn it on so that stays controlled, right? Because otherwise it's very stretchy.
Yeah.
So that's just another trick.
Yeah, let's see that from the other side then. Let's just hold that up from so we see the right side.
The right side. So there's the seam. Can you see that seam there? Just here, let's see. So it's obviously it's a dress with a skirt attached.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
So there's that seam is just below the waistline. Can you see that there's a couple pleats in it? And so here's the what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, that's stop it.
Which won't ever stretch.
Yeah.
So it's just another trick. And I'm using a very fine piece of lining, so you can't see it in the finished article. So there you are. So there's a few things you can do to help make it easier when you're sewing these temperamental fabrics.
It's been a great help, and I'm sure it's going to be a great help for people who are watching. And if not, it should hopefully be just give some reassurance to actually not be frightened of jersey, because I think many people are, and understandably so, because of it being unruly and wobbly and stretchy.
You know, it has a mind of its own. It's not controlled in that square warp and weft-like way. It's it has it leaps and curls and does all sorts of things. But
from your point of view, from what you make and what you do you often work with jersey? And if you do you like it?
I do, very much so. I like it. I like chiffon. I like lightweight jerseys. I like that couture range of cloth. You know, it's delicate. It's the divas, these fabrics. They're real divas, and it gets more and more risky as you get further and further along with the job. Silk satins, Duchess satins, dupions, all that, netting, tulle, all those fabrics. You just have to be so careful, and you have to clean your equipment all the time, and you've got to wash your hands all the time, and the closer you get to finish, the more tense the whole thing gets.
Yeah.
You do risk making a mistake. It's called the design of risk, actually, because which is sewing, which is probably like knitting, because you can be inattentive.
Yeah.
You can make a mistake. You can have an accident, and the job is pretty well ruined. I don't know about knitting. I think that you can kind of take work out and back up and find something that's gone wrong, and we're not that lucky.
No. As I found out when I was making my first shirt with all those plackets, it can easily become a very expensive hobby, and then you make a mistake and you're like, oh, and I suppose not wishing to make people spend more money, but if you are buying fabric, and maybe you can, would you say, get an extra meter just in case? Because sometimes that fabric is not available anymore 2 months later, because you don't often get to sew straight away when you buy the fabric.
Yeah, that's true, especially in our line of work here, because the couture fabrics, they're limited runs.
Yeah.
So it isn't like, all these great woolen merchants that we have all over the UK that they weave, thousands and thousands of meters, and you can get a book of samples, and that's good for the whole year. And if you need more, you simply order more. It doesn't happen that way, when you go to get a couture fabric. So yes, you have to be safe and get a little bit more, like you say, because you might try a facing that then doesn't work out. So that facing is gone. You might want to cut a bias strip, finish it off a little neater. Well, cutting 45 degrees of that fabric, that takes more cloth, doesn't it? We've talked about that. So that's a good point you bring up, that getting an extra meter gives you that peace of mind that if something does go wrong.
But it's easy for us to say, but some of these fabrics can be quite expensive. Jersey, though, I have found doesn't seem to be as expensive as my patchwork quilting cotton a meter, because jersey is often longer on the bolt, isn't it, as well? It
goes farther, doesn't it? Because it's 140, 150 centimeters wide, 60 inches. So yes, I mean, you can get a top out of that, in much less than a meter. About 80 centimeters will give you a nice top, hip length top, won't it?
Yeah.
With that width. Yeah, I did notice that too, that jerseys are less in price than normal working wear.
As we said at the beginning, you've still got to be careful with price. Cheap jersey, as I said, I think it rolls even more.
There we go again, you getting what you pay for, right?
Absolutely. Right, before we go, because you've had a long day, and we're all busy people. I had a lovely question. Well, yes, it was a question from Teddy, who loves watching our videos. He is a big creator and crafter, and makes little dolls, and he likes to listen to us and to you as he works in his studio. And he left a question on our last video, and he said, I'd like to ask Carol if, when it comes to things she's inspired to make, if she's more inspired by things she sees or more inspired by a fabric she finds, or both.
That's really interesting. And I would have to say both, because sometimes I will just come across a design and I'll think, I want to make that. And sometimes I'll come across a cloth and I'll say, I have to buy that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I've got to have it. And that's why I have about 10 banker's boxes full of cloth. All spec purchases, Stuart, all like, I really love that. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll get a couple of meters, because that generally covers like a knee-length dress or a pair of trousers or a top or something. So a couple of meters. But I've been a terrible cloth hoarder. I've got so many lengths of fabric and bolts and things all over the place. And I always think I'll get to that one day. And what's really lovely is coming across one of the boxes, opening it up and saying, oh, I've got this.
Oh, wonderful.
So good question. And I would have to say it is definitely both.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you, Teddy, for that. Well, and thank you, Carol, for the time you've taken to make those videos, because they do help. And I remember when we did the Sewing Bee last year for those 10 weeks, everyone loved your videos. So I think we're going to prep ourselves. We're going to do a couple more So What videos over January and February, but I think we're going to have March off to then get ready for Sewing Bee when it comes back in April, because it's intense, but we do love it, don't we?
We do. We do. I'm really looking forward to this season. We've got a new presenter, and the skill level is really getting quite high. And so I know they're challenging the contestants, but in a really good way. It's terrific viewing.
Yeah. And because we love sewing. So it's lovely to be able to, almost like we said before, like the football pundits, when they get to talk about it in detail, we get to talk about it, pull it apart, examine it. Could they have done this? Could they have done that? Or that's an interesting technique to use. Could they have used a different technique? It's lovely to be able to analyze it like that.
Certainly is. Certainly is. And also sometimes the judges will say something which doesn't quite fit, but you can tell it's been pasted into the program somehow. And that's what I like. I like to say that, where did that comment come from? Because it doesn't follow, does it? You know, this is a process. That didn't work. That didn't sound right. I like that bit.
Well, we've got that to come in April, but we've got a couple more episodes from us so far. But I hope this Jersey one has been of use. I know it has been for me, and having those videos there. And the beauty of YouTube is you can keep coming back to it over and over and over again. But I think we go right back to the beginning of the video, and you said it's all about preparation and all those early little factors just to even stop it from rolling that you can put in. I know are quite frustrating because you can't sew your pattern straight away, but those preparations, even though we've said it many times before, actually save you time in the long run, don't they?
Preparation is the key. And if things get a bit itchy and you get a bit anxious, just get up, just walk around for a bit and come back to it. It's nothing to rush, trust me, especially with that overlocker.
Yeah. Because
you can have some, we should talk about things that can go wrong with an overlocker. We should make that, because you remember when somebody was serging off a ruffle or something and they just cut the ruffle up. Do you remember in last year's series? So you know, it's nothing to hurry.
It's so easy to do because I've done it. So here's your sleeve. This is the last thing I did. And I'm sewing, I haven't got a spare hand. I'm sewing that undersleeve arm, then I'm coming down there to go down there. And I thought I'll do it on the overlocker at the same time. So I'm sewing them together and trimming. And I didn't come round right. So I didn't get the angle right. So I hacked into the body. Oh, well, yeah, you can't see. So rather than going down the arm and then down the body, downwards, I hacked that way because I didn't get my steering, and then you're completely ruined, haven't you? Because you've gone into the front of your fabric.
That's it.
So
anything that gets,
rather than going downwards, I've gone, and then that's ruined, then, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're trying to run over a junction, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, and that's gets very tricky with an overlocker. You've got to go slower, and you've got to feed your work in differently. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We should talk about the overlocker a bit.
See, that's the exact angle. So instead of going down there and then going downwards, I went boom into the... It's like, no!
Yes, you got caught away on the straightaway, didn't you?
I thought, Stuart, you should have just sewed it first and then overlocked it. But no, we get... Oh... Been wonderful chatting. I know you're all busy there, so we're going to finish. Who you've got in the background there? There's someone beavering away.
Laura, come say hi. Laura's a very, very talented designer, and she's about to launch her first collection. Laura, this is everyone on YouTube land. Hello.
You're not going to pull a midnight thing today, and you're working to a deadline.
Well, we'll go a few more hours, but then well, we've opened up a bottle of wine. We're going to start relaxing now. This is the kind of the home stretch. So we're going to chill a little bit while we work away to the finish.
So you've been working on this project for what, a couple of years now?
Well, all of a year. We started talking about it about a year ago, and we started to really work on it from last March, I think it was, and just work on prototypes. But that's all Laura's, just her vision is amazing. And we wanted this tailored focused, which is where I was able to come in, because we want that sculpture and that long-term life in the garments. And we also want everything that, that we've learned about sewing for women. My company is Tailoring for Women. It's almost 34 years old now, young in London. And everything we've learned about the female figure and how to flatter it, we're putting into this collection. Oh. So we've got a lot of high hopes for it. It's a tricky time to be taking this kind of a risk, but we're sure it's going the right way.
I was going to say, if you managed to do it over the last year, which must be the hardest restrictions ever, then right. You two can do anything.
See? We have a fan, Laura.
Right, and well, we look forward to hearing updates then as we go along. But here's to a great 2022 for you both. Thank you very much for your time. It's always been lovely, and thank you for you, audience out there, for watching and joining in. I'm sure it's been a great, what might I say, a wealth of information here at your fingertips. So,
well, it's just such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to share.
Let us know in the comments what you thought. Maybe if you start a project and the video helped and the tutorials helped, and you went, oh yes, I've done this because of that. We'd love to see whatever you make if you can. You can always Instagram us. We both have Instagram accounts. Always tag Carol or me in. It's all written down in the description below. Go and find Carol, like her on Instagram, follow her, and share pictures. We love to see work. And then until then, we'll see you in either next week or in a couple of weeks' time with a couple more episodes, won't we?
We will do indeed. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot.
See ya. Bye.